I've always wondered about that. If there is a human brain, then theoretically we should be able to do this with technology as well. Just replicate how the human brain works. And that's it. What is the complexity?
The complexity lies in the fact that it's too Eve. I would say, excuse me. Question posed. This analogy, to be precise, the way the question is framed is related to the idea of a neuron as switching cell, similar to our artificial neuron. In fact, it doesn't work. The fact that it doesn't work, this is now known for sure. Here is a small nematode. It's called C. elegans. Its entire nervous system consists of about 300 neurons. Here, it has been fully mapped and modeled. But the intelligence of C. elegans cannot be modeled. Moreover, there are a huge number of single-celled animals. It's impossible to model C. elegans. Moreover, there is a huge number of single-celled animals that demonstrate incredibly flexible behavior. Well, for example, amoebas. You really have to see this. Here are films shot through a microscope of amoeba hunting. You see the behavior of a quite meaningful creature, but the amoeba has no nervous system. Moreover, experiments were conducted. Boris Ryzhabikov did this back in the early 70s. With a single neuron, these experiments showed that a single neuron can be trained, but I won't go into the details of all these experiments. This neuron was placed in a certain uncomfortable position for it. It was able to adapt to it, and when it was placed in that position over and over again, it initially took a long time to adapt. Then it got faster, and eventually it learned the behavior strategy. So a single neuron is capable of learning, but it has no synapses. It is believed that learning occurs through changes in the synaptic connections between neurons. No. Single neuron can learn on its own. So, a neuron has some kind of interneuronal thinking system built into it. So the idea that neurons of these adventurers and the brain can be simulated based on this concept...
It's much more complicated.
Incorrect, yes. And there are ideas about what this could be. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hammer wrote a couple of articles about this. And there are wonderful books by Roger Penrose, two remarkable books, The Emperor's New Mind and Shadows of the Mind, where it's already discussed at the level of, so to speak, a good monograph. It is written that within the cell you can find systems. There are several of them that claim to play a role in this kind of intracellular thinking. Moreover, these systems have one very interesting additional feature. Look here. As one of the main contenders for the role of intracellular thinking, Penrose and Hameroff consider the so-called cytoskeleton of the cell. The cytoskeleton of the cell is a really fascinating thing. So, this is a crystalline structure. These little threads represent a crystalline structure. It's a complex made of tubulin molecules. So tubulin is a simple protein. And the tubulin molecules can exist in two different states. It looks like this little thing that does this. So it can either be like this or like that. And this affects the electric moment associated with this molecule. So this tubulin is a system with two states. It fits perfectly for the role of a bit. Moreover, two neighboring tubulins can interact with each other through an electric field. So this whole little thread of the cytoskeleton, this microtubule, is very similar to a cellular automaton. These tubulins can have some waves, meaning that states of tubulin can propagate along them. So they can work like a cellular automaton. So, in mathematics, there is a theorem that states that any computer's operation can be represented using a cellular automaton. So you already have a ready-made system that can function like a computer. Moreover,
it's all in one cell?
This is inside one cell. Well, I can't tell you right now how many molecules there are, right? These tubulins, which can work like bits, number in the tens of millions, I think. So it's quite a big computer. Moreover, these little threads of the cytoskeleton, these crystalline tubes, are arranged in a very interesting way. They are lined with a layer of crystalline water on both the outside and the inside. So, in a certain way, one water molecule is arranged in relation to another. So this structure turns out to be very well protected from the environment, and generally speaking, we can't rule out the possibility that this is not just a cellular automaton, but a quantum cellular automaton. And so it's very possible that the cell contains not just a computer, but a quantum computer within itself. And in fact, if we now look at it from the other side, how we think, our thinking performs such incredible tricks that are completely impossible to implement. The idea arises on a regular computer that, in fact, some quantum modes of information processing are at work. That's how we exist. So inside the cell, there could very well be quantum modes of information processing. And it's very possible that our consciousness, and even the consciousness of individual living cells, operates based on some quantum algorithms for processing information. That's not out of the question right now.
So, the quantum nature of consciousness, it turns out, has a lot of such things.
Yes, could be. But this question needs to be studied. But for now, we can't even get close to this question. A lot of people are fixated on the neural network paradigm of the brain. This is related to all sorts of misconceptions. From my point of view about the possibilities of re-engineering the brain, that is, creating computers, based on modeling the structure of the brain, that it's impossible. It has already been proven in the modeling mentioned at the very beginning. See, elegant, but it doesn't work. Everything is modeled and practically nothing works.
Or maybe it's just because there are few cells. With the given example, we still have 50 billion cells, but how many are there? Actually, I was mistaken. In the human brain, there are about 86 billion nerve cells, not 50 as I mentioned here. Let's continue the podcast.
Well, 50 billion is just way too few. We cannot model the behavior of C. elegans by fully modeling its nervous system. Here is modeled nervous system of C. elegans. C. elegans doesn't want to function like a real nervous system, and it's unclear why. That's everything that was managed to be done there to model this writhing movement. Well, it's some kind of simple machinery. I personally have this idea that, in fact, this neural network might not be the apparatus through which we think, or maybe it's just an interface that connects the internal quantum levels of information processing with the external world.
And we are interacting with the interface just right now. Yes, it might be a silly question, but can we conclude that if we assume consciousness has a quantum nature, what if, let's say, some...
It's hypothesis?
Yes, a hypothesis. I'll note, yes, a hypothesis that some planets or stars or even the universe itself might also have consciousness.
Great question. That's a better question than it might seem. This answer is already connected to my point of view on where is the boundary. Well, for example, for a person, between their consciousness and the surrounding environment. So, look, at one time it was naively thought that human consciousness is concentrated in the brain, but that's just completely wrong. So why? Well, because the brain's work heavily depends on, for example, a person's hormonal system. Are you in love or not? Yes. Are you interested in something or not? How are you sleeping, and so on? It's all regulated by a person's hormonal system. So, at the very least, we think not just with one brain. The way our brain thinks is 100% tied to your body. But in reality, an isolated person from society is like Mowgli. This is the Mowgli syndrome. These are children placed in the jungle who, if they spend too much time there, in the first few months of life, they don't turn into humans. So, human consciousness does not exist in isolation. So, at the very least, consciousness is a social phenomenon. So, human thinking, in our understanding, is definitely not thinking. That happens in just one head. This is the thinking of society. But that's not all. So, there's a writer sitting there, right? He's writing his novel, and he has a beloved dog. He is emotionally connected to her. So, the dog's behavior, his interaction with the dog strongly influences his thinking. So part of his thinking sprouts from the dog's thinking. So it turns out that human society is not the boundary within which human thinking exists. It exists in our pets. And take Scriabin, for example. When he came up with color music, it's known how it happened. He talked about it himself. He observed something indescribable. A beautiful sunset. If it weren't for that sunset, the thought of color music might never have crossed his mind. So this beautiful sunset became part of Scriabin's thinking at the moment. He was creating that music. So it turns out that Scriabin's boundary of thinking is no longer limited to his head, but is included in society, and it expands even to, so to speak, the movement of the sun relative to the earth. Well, about my thinking, like astrophysics, means that explosions in gamma-ray bursts actually shape my thinking. So they participate in my thinking. Let whoever says that's not the case throw a stone at me. So where is the thinking that I feel in my head concentrated? No, it's not concentrated anywhere. In fact, the universe thinks in different ways as a whole. And you see, this is not some kind of fantasy. I gave you a bunch of specific examples of how this happens. So, in reality, thinking is a process localized throughout the entire universe as a whole. And actually, maybe even in the multiverse, considering the experience of our previous conversation about the multiverse, right? And it's only our brains that are that place. So, where is this process? It manifests most vividly by creating such an obsessive illusion. What he is focused on here...
The feeling of ego?
Yes. The feeling of ego, nothing like that. It's actually nowhere. It is strictly localized throughout the entire universe, or maybe even across the multiverse. And it can sprout through our brains like individual little lights on our planet, maybe in other civilizations, or perhaps in civilizations that existed infinitely long ago. Well, in the past of our multiverse, for example, this is such a universal or even multiversal phenomenon